There will be no peace in this world as long as the Chinese Communist Party is driving to defeat the United States as one step towards global domination.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Firecracker Farm. Today we're going to be talking about the potential dangers of allowing more Chinese students into American universities. My guest today is Bill Gertz. He's an award-winning national security journalist, author, and analyst who has spent decades covering defense, intelligence, and foreign policy. He is currently the national security correspondent for the Washington Times and writes a weekly column, Inside the Ring. He has reported extensively on U.S. military affairs, espionage, cyber warfare, and the global strategies of adversaries such as China, Russia, and Iran. Let's get into the episode. You wrote a book, Deceiving the Sky, and you lay out China's long-term plan on how they are going to challenge the U.S. And since I would love for people to go read that book, but in the essence of compressing this into a standalone conversation, can you hit with me the wave tops as to what you see China's plan? How does China view the U.S.? What is their role and strategy as you see it now and going forward into the future?
Sure. So there was Mao Zedong founded China in 1949, ended up killing an estimated 60 million people in China. That kind of ended with Deng Xiaoping in the late 70s, early 80s. And he basically saved China from communist ideology. Basically, his approach was, doesn't matter if the cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. So that began this, what they call the modernization. Fast forward to 2012, Xi Jinping, a diehard Marxist-Leninist, comes to power in China. And he basically has an entire game plan called National Rejuvenation, which really has nothing to do with the Chinese nation. It's basically China's plan to take over the world. I was fortunate in March to travel to Asia with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and I got a meeting with him, and I told him, I said, you know, and he recognized me as somebody that's focused on China for decades, and I told him, I said, China's going to take over the world unless we stop them. And if they do, it's going to be a horrible, horrible world.
Again, so that is definitely their long-term strategy. What is their tactical approach to actually doing so? I mean, putting that on a board, China's vision board, if you will, putting that on the vision board is one thing. How would they actually accomplish that?
Well, they're working very, very aggressively on a number of different fronts. And I lay this out in Deceiving the Sky. The threat from China is military, intelligence, diplomatic, economic, you name it, informational, social media. They are out to restore China's, quote, place in the world. They look at China as the middle kingdom between heaven and earth, and superior to the entire rest of the planet. And now combined with Marxism-Leninism, they view the United States as the leader of world capitalism. And most importantly, the major impediment to preventing China from achieving this global hegemony, this global dominance. So they're working very aggressively to weaken and undermine the United States. And we're doing a pretty good job of it ourselves here with a lot of our political divisions. But China is definitely hoping to reap the benefits of a weakened and ultimately destroyed United States.
Do you see the U.S.'s reliance on China from a production perspective? And I would have to assume that China realizes that we are beholden to their ability to produce, at least until if we wanted to move that ability back to the U.S., which would be a matter of years, if not decades, to do so. Is that a strategic approach that fits into what you're talking about, the ability to long-term create this reliance, and then they have control, essentially?
Yes. Well, they're exploiting that. So, you know, Going back a little bit on my book, Deceiving the Sky, came out a few years ago. Back in 2000, I wrote a book called The China Threat. And this was a play on what Beijing calls the China threat theory. And China's Communist Party, through their diplomats, intelligence personnel, military attaches, they monitor opposition to their so-called modernization, and they basically calculate how to basically achieve that modernization and overcome those obstacles. Anyway, they regard the China threat theory as just opposition. It's a code for anti-communism. But after I wrote that book, every publisher that I had told me, "Yeah, we don't want another single China topic book." And I was really
Really?
surprised. Yeah, I figured they figured these books by China don't sell, or there's something about the market that they didn't like. Finally, back in 2019, a good friend of mine, retired Marine, told me, "Bill, you got to update uh, China threat." So Deceiving the Sky was kind of an update on that. And basically, I lay out all of the things that I had in 2000. Again, the intelligence threat, the military threat, the economic threat, the informational threat, and how it has grown and achieved a much more greater threat to us. And that's really what's laid out in the book. And as I said, we are facing a really difficult threat in the Chinese Communist Party. And what happened was, and I explained this too, for 40 years, the US policy towards China was they're not a threat. And I heard this in a whole bunch of different formats from both Democratic and Republican administrations starting in the 70s. They played down the China threat. They played down China's massive human rights abuses. They played down China's proliferation of nuclear weapons to nations like Pakistan and North Korea. All of it was done based on the idea that if we just trade with China, that this would have a moderating influence and ultimately lead to a non-communist, non-threatening China. Well, guess
Mm.
what? Uh, it was a huge, utter strategic failure by the United States. And we are now intertwined economically with China in ways that we should never have done. The current Trump administration is trying to rectify that. They recognize that our industrial base has been exported to China. We rely so much on Chinese exports. And so now there's a push to decouple. This is what they call decoupling. That is, try and disintegrate our economy and not be reliant on China. We saw that during the COVID pandemic when so much of our pharmaceuticals and other things were basically being farmed out to be made in China, obviously at much lower quality as well. So they're starting to begin to withdraw from this thing. China as well, again, they've upped their game. They're taking a much more hardline approach to the United States, again, calling the United States the leader of world capitalism to be vanquished. And I monitored this very closely, and obviously their military buildup is also very, very concerning.
Of the threats that you listed, that you perceive coming from China, if you had to list them from, I don't want to say most dangerous to least, but let's say most pressing to something if we had to array them in the order, a 1 meter target all the way out to a 100 meter target, what would you say is the greatest threat in those that you listed currently?
I would say it would be a combination of their military power, which is growing at a very aggressive rate, and not just in the conventional force, but in the nuclear forces as well, and their informational cyber power. And again, their communist ideology infuses ancient Chinese strategy, which is based on the title of the book about how China can even deceive heaven in order to achieve its goal. But basically, the military threat is growing really strongly, and the U.S. is trying to prepare to be able to deter, for instance, the nuclear buildup in China. Several years ago, the commander of the U.S. Strategic Command, who's in charge of our nuclear forces, declared in front of Congress that China is engaged in what he called nuclear breakout. And that's not an official term, but what it really means is that their buildup is happening so fast, and the level of power is increasing so enormously that the U.S. is required to take some drastic action to counter it. What it means is basically our whole nuclear deterrence strategy was based on the Soviet Union and then Russia. Now it's got to be based on a growing Chinese nuclear force, which is expanding and shows no signs of ending. On the cyber informational front, this is really, again, the Sun Tzu idea of defeating your enemy without firing a shot. This is really what the Chinese are hoping to do. They're military power. They're both connected. This, again, it's kind of soft power and hard power, but they are very, very good at conducting cyber operations to steal information, to prepare the battle space, getting inside of our critical infrastructures with malicious software that they could use or even threaten to use in a future crisis. Imagine if something happens in the South China Sea or in the Taiwan Strait, and China says, "Do you want the lights to go out all over the United States? You better not do anything while we're taking this action." So those are the two major threats, I would say.
I've talked with some people, not necessarily discussing the direct threat militarily or the cyber threat, but more culturally, China, and from a lens of population age, one-child policy, the data, which I would have to imagine that China realizes at this point too, that they're going to have a significant population decline here in the future. Do you feel that that's a lever behind them pushing this action now, or is this just their natural step in the progression that they've had planned for a long time?
It's hard to say. China definitely has domestic problems. As you mentioned, a demographic decline, a lot of unemployment with young people. They have something in China where the young people, they call it lying flat. And it's a term that means basically there's no interest. The system has no benefit to these young people. They're not going to do anything. They're not going to care about anything.
I will say that might
hand,
actually apply to some of the younger people on our own borders as well. That might be ubiquitous
yes,
across the world at this point.
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt you. Please continue.
Also their economic problems are fairly serious in the terms of their local governments are in huge debt. They have a huge real estate bubble. In other words, they've built massive amounts of, there's entire cities that are empty of apartment buildings and others. That said, this is a totalitarian system. People, say it's authoritarian, but in my book, I have the definition of a totalitarian system. They basically control everything. They control information, and they have the most powerful internal security system on the planet. So they can control things. And Xi Jinping, again, as a diehard communist, has gone to great lengths. Almost on a monthly basis, there'll be some type of purge within the security services or within the military. People think that this is somehow a bad thing for Xi Jinping, that he's somehow being threatened by other forces. No, it's not that. He's preparing and strengthening this internal system of communist control. And that's really the issue. The Chinese Communist Party, which now boasts 100 million members, is really its main goal. This is a political party which has one of the largest militaries in the world. That's not a national army. The People's Liberation Army, unlike the U.S. military or the British military or a free world military, they are a party army. And they can, and in addition to that, they have something called the People's Armed Police, which is almost personnel-wise as large as the PLA. And their job is internal security and preventing any kind of threat to the Chinese Communist Party. And what most people don't really understand is that the Chinese people, which estimates 1.4 billion, they do not like the Communist Party. They do not want to live under communist rule. They want to be free. They through the internet and through information, they know what freedom is. They know what the ability to live in a free world, free country is, and they don't like it. And it was only the first Trump administration that really tried to leverage this disparity between the mass of the Chinese people and the Chinese Communist Party. And that was in the person of then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And through his policies, he said, the Chinese Communist Party is not the same as the Chinese people. We support the Chinese people. We do not support the Chinese Communist Party. And this was an extremely effective tool. It's kind of a similar tool that was used under President Ronald Reagan or in the old Soviet Union and the Soviet Empire, basically supporting peoples of the Soviet Empire and working against the Soviet Communist Party, which eventually collapsed in 1991. It's my belief that that's eventually going to happen to the Chinese Communist Party, but it's going to take some external pressure, hopefully by the U.S. as a leader, to support the Chinese people to get rid of this horrible totalitarian system.
I think those are incredibly important delineations to make. I think if you don't make that delineation, you're painting with a broom instead of a paintbrush. And, China is our enemy. Like, well, let's be specific. The Chinese Communist Party versus the Chinese people. Like you said, Russia versus the Russian people. I'm a fan of being precise with that language and drawing those lines because, like you said, the vast majority of people, and actually either of those countries are great examples, they don't have any say over the direction that those in power are actually pushing things. And they may well not agree with it in any way, shape, or form, but they know that they have to keep their mouth shut because they're being monitored.
Yeah. Now, a good story from my book that I like to mention, and it has to do with a guy named Roger Robinson. Roger Robinson was the son of an FBI agent, and he worked for David Rockefeller at the Chase Manhattan Bank back in the 70s. And he got a job in the Reagan White House, and he went to Reagan's national security advisor, Bill Clark, and Clark took him in to see Reagan, and he said, look, I know the financial situation of the Soviet Union because Chase had been doing business and financial business with the Soviet Union. He said, this is an extremely weak financial system, and with the right tools, we could bring that entire system down. And so basically, Reagan said, go do it. And so this was one of the economic components, basically squeezing the Soviet Union and the Soviet satellite states until the Soviet Union collapsed. Fast forward to the 2020s, Roger Robinson is now working to do the same kind of thing with China, looking at the Chinese investment in the U.S. and how U.S. investment is propping up the communist regime in China. I don't think he has the same support that he had with Ronald Reagan as with President Trump, but he's trying to do it, and he's done a number of amazing studies looking at how if we were to cut off and limit and prevent U.S. financial power from assisting the Chinese Communist Party, that it would ultimately lead to its collapse and hopefully its replacement with a non-threatening, democratic, pro-freedom regime.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are rapidly approaching the holiday season, which means that you need to be thinking about gifts. If you want to give a gift that actually has some substance, that everyone really loves, I'll highly recommend a product that I personally use every day and can stand behind. Firecracker Farm Hot Salt. Firecracker Farm is a sponsor, yes, but that's not why I talk about them. I choose to do so because it's a genuinely great product. It's fantastic, small batch, made with care, and it delivers. Delicious is really an understatement. It has the perfect heat to flavor ratio that you can fully control and elevates everything you put it on, from eggs to steak to chicken, or even as something as simple as pasta. The gear is solid too. It comes in a really nice stainless steel push grinder. It's well built and feels right in your hand. I have to say, it has a great tactile quality that makes it super satisfying to use. I'm telling you, you want this, and it makes an awesome gift. The best part is, when you buy one, you're supporting a small American family business, and you're buying something that's truly high quality that you'll use every single day. Alex and his family put a ton of love and dedication into this product. One small catch, you are not going to find this on Amazon last minute. They make hot salt in small batches, and inventory goes quickly. So if you want this, you need to make the move now, because they are going to sell out. So get your gift shopping done today. Head over to firecracker.farm and use the code Ironclad, all caps, all one word, at checkout, and you're going to get 10% off of your order. Today's episode is brought to you by DeleteMe. We have talked a lot about people getting caught in timeshare scams, falling for pig butchering schemes, or getting those mysterious text messages that you have no idea where they came from. I've spoken with guests who hunt hackers and work to protect people's personal information. But here's the thing. Your data, your personal data, your name, your address, your phone number, even your relatives' names can be bought and sold online by data brokers, putting you at risk for identity theft, scams, and harassment. Now, that is why we have partnered with DeleteMe. Like the experts we've had on the show who actively stop hackers and scammers, DeleteMe works behind the scenes to remove your personal information from hundreds of people search and data broker sites. They do it continuously, securely, and without outsourcing. Plus, real privacy advisors are available for custom requests, so you're never on your own. DeleteMe has been the leading service for removing personally identifiable information for over 15 years. They verify your data is actually on these sites before requesting removal, reducing unnecessary exposure. Wirecutter named them the #1 service of its kind, and judges, journalists, creators, and podcasters all trust DeleteMe to protect their privacy. Nowadays, this isn't just a nice to have. I feel like it's an essential. And DeleteMe makes it super easy. Just create your account, enter in your basic information on the dashboard, and they're going to do the rest. Within about a week, the first report arrives showing exactly what has been removed. Take control of your digital privacy today at joindeleteme.com/ironclad and use the coupon code Ironclad, all one word, all uppercase. You can also scan the QR code to get started. It's one of the few services actively keeping your personal information out of the wrong hands. Trump recently said he would allow 600,000 Chinese students into American colleges, because I want to talk a little bit about the colleges, that environment, the Confucius Institutes, which I'm going to be honest with you, I had not heard about until I was doing some prep for our interview. But knowing what you know about China, knowing what you know about again, so I'll be more precise, the Chinese Communist Party and their aims, not necessarily your average Chinese citizen. Knowing what you know about the Communist Party, what's your initial reaction to Trump saying that he would allow 600,000 Chinese students into American colleges?
Well, I've written about this in my columns and news reporting for the Washington Times. Basically, I disagree with it strongly. What we're seeing on the part of the current Trump administration is a concerted effort by the policymakers within the administration to basically dial back the much harder line policies that were imposed on China during the first Trump administration. That's under Pompeo and other officials then. He basically wants to get it. He's a deal-oriented president, very much transactional. And he also believes strongly that the power of his personality will be able to convince these foreign leaders to support his policies. I think he miscalculates when it comes to dealing with Xi Jinping. As I said, he's a diehard Marxist-Leninist. He was purged during the Cultural Revolution, sent to the countryside, and he thought it was a good thing, and came back. And most of those that were purged back in the 60s and 70s during the Cultural Revolution turned against communism and said, "Look, we don't want to do that again." But Xi Jinping is again, very strong Marxist-Leninist. He's infused Chinese nationalism into it. He's also moving away from the Deng Xiaoping policies that allowed economic investment and economic development and basically a kind of state capitalism to go. He's dialing that back, and it's very much hurting the Chinese economy. But as for the students, this is I reported back in the last spring, the State Department announced that it was going to begin revoking the visas for some 270,000 Chinese students. And basically, they were focusing on these students, most of whom are members of the Chinese Communist Party, because
Mhm.
they're basically going to our schools, they're taking their expertise, and they're bringing it back to China. And China has something called the Civil Military Fusion Program. This is a program that is in regulation, in Communist Party regulation, that requires every civilian development, science, technology, whatever, to be available to the military or the intelligence services. So
Hmm.
basically, these students, uh, you know, they're not all spies, but they are required under the communist system to make themselves available and what they know available to this repressive communist dictatorship in Beijing. Um, the president also has done a couple of other things that have weakened his approach to China, and my theory is that he is struggling very much to get a summit meeting with Xi Jinping before the end of the year. He's announced that that's one of his goals. The Chinese have been playing that like a violin. In other words, forcing the U.S. to make major concessions. An earlier concession that was made was that the president announced that he was loosening U.S. export controls on a certain type of NVIDIA microchip that's vital for developing artificial intelligence, which is the cutting edge technology right now. And it's also building cutting edge military weapons and equipment. The administration defended that by saying, well, we're not allowing the sale of the most advanced microchips. But the Chinese showed earlier this year through something called DeepSeek that they were able to take not the most advanced microchips, but fuse them together and develop a really impressive artificial intelligence system. So those are two very troubling things in my view that, again, I think the president thinks the power of his personality is going to be able to somehow convince Xi Jinping not to be a threat to the United States. I just reported recently in my Inside the Ring column that the Pentagon has a new national defense strategy, and early draft of it was leaked. And the draft said that the Pentagon is considering a shift from focusing on China as the premier national security threat to more of a regional focus on homeland defense and the Western Hemisphere. So there are some very troubling signs about the current administration's policies. I think a lot of
Hmm.
that is a reflection of some of the really hardline MAGA people who really are much more, I would say, neo-isolationist and really want to focus solely on the U.S. and less so on foreign threats.
I mean, that would be great if we lived in a light switch binary world and we could shut off the rest of what is going on in the world and only focus on ourselves. I don't know anybody living in that objective reality. I mean, I think shades of both could be true. Maybe we should focus maybe a little bit on picking up our own garbage and cleaning up our own streets. But we have to, as you've already laid out, the Chinese Communist Party. It's not as if they're being incredibly silent about their aims, goals, and desires. I mean, I can point at whether it's purchasing real estate around military installations, having people legitimately trying to penetrate military organizations to receive classified information. You mentioned the students. I mean, there is, in addition to them taking the knowledge back, which I understand, people wanting to go back to where they came from and, improving the situation there. But there's also an amazing amount of intellectual property theft that is well documented as well. I don't, I don't understand how, knowing all those things to be true, how are the people? What is their justification to for the people who had a harder line, or the previous administration, the Trump's first administration, that had a harder line towards China? What is the justification for the people saying we need to back this off? Like, what's their reasonable approach to articulate that?
Uh, yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I have some theories. I don't know for certain why there is that, but there is definitely within the MAGA community, there is a certain element that is views any kind of foreign involvement or engagement as not worth it,
Hmm.
expensive, dangerous, and somehow distracting from domestic U.S. development. I think that's kind of the approach. I know that there are some of those people. I've met some of them inside the administration. Good example is Elbridge Colby. Colby was a deputy undersecretary of defense in the first Trump administration. He's now the principal undersecretary of defense for policy, basically the number 3 position and the most powerful policymaker for national security in the Pentagon. And he basically has a kind of what I would call it, kind of a defeatist approach to dealing with China. He said, China's too big. It's too late now. We can't really catch up with them militarily. And so therefore, let's just accommodate them and distract them and try to prevent them from going to war against us. And to me, I think that's a recipe for a disaster. I think that is kind of the antithesis of the idea of peace through strength. Now, on the other hand, we are building up our military forces, but we're also focusing a lot on robotics and drones and things. And we really need capital investment in warships. I mean, just look
Hmm.
at the Chinese are doing both. Again, their drone forces are expanding dramatically, and their naval forces in particular. And of course, in the Pacific, naval power is the coin of the realm, and we're definitely lacking in naval power. So again, I'm not too certain on why they have this approach, but it is kind of a neo-isolationist approach. I think Vice President J.D. Vance, I think, is a proponent of this view as well. So those are two very powerful forces within the administration, and you can see it in some of their nominations. For example, recently at the Commerce Department, there was an appointee or nomination for a key post for national security, and he was withdrawn. And the sources tell me that he was considered too looking and not inward looking enough. You mentioned the
Hmm.
Confucius Institutes. I think I wanted
Yes.
to talk about that too. Yeah. Now, in the context, Confucius Institutes, uh, this came to the fore during the first Trump administration, 2016 to 2019 or so,
Did the
and
Confucius
basically,
Institutes predate that first administration? When did they start? When were they
yes.
formed and created?
Uh, I don't know exactly when they were formed, but they've been around, I would say, for the last 10 or 15 years.
Okay.
And what they are is basically they are an element of what the Chinese Communist Party calls the United Front Work Department. This is a quasi-intelligence unit, party unit that basically, according to congressional investigators, their budget is some upwards of $11 billion a year. And their job is to influence the world to support the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese communist policies. And so they were able to set up these Confucius Institutes on 100 college campuses. And what this basically did was they paid the campuses, they used their economic power to get there. They were ostensibly language and cultural centers, but they actually served as influence and propaganda operations for the Chinese Communist Party in universities. And how did that work? They could influence the agendas and teaching schedules for these universities so that they weren't teaching about the truth about the Chinese Communist Party. That's, to me, one of the most important things. They also organized pro-communist students to challenge and sometimes beat up dissidents who were promoting freedom for the Uyghurs in Western China or Tibetans or Hong Kong, the repression of democracy in Hong Kong. And so these were, a lot of them have been closed down as a result of the first Trump administration and also some efforts in Congress. but I followed it a little bit closely. And what a lot of them have done is basically renamed themselves into some other entity and basically hidden below the radar. There's also this idea of United Front Work Department. They're very, very powerful in influencing the United States, and they do that through influencing business leaders, politicians, in academic leaders, and in the media. It's a broad approach to making sure, and it could in fact be one reason why these publishers didn't want a single topic China book until I wrote Deceiving the Sky. But clearly they're very effective. I remember reporting on a speech by a Chinese official who said, if we can't get a politician or a business leader to do what we want and we offer him money and he won't take it, we simply offer him more money until he agrees to do it. It was posted online, and then the censors immediately removed it, but it was still captured.
Yeah, everybody says they don't have a number until there's a lot of zeros on the check. You start you questioning yourself. It's interesting about the Confucius Institutes and them being a college. A lot of our educational institutions rely on foreign money to survive and thrive as well. How do we balance that against national security threats?
Well, anything to dealing with the Chinese Communist Party, Chinese government, we should not have anything to do with. And when Trump announced that he was going to double the number of Chinese students here to 600,000, one of the justifications was that a lot of the smaller universities need the money from the Chinese who pay full freight when they go to college. And my view is we shouldn't have any Chinese students here unless they're here to learn about democracy, unless they agree to undergo training to understand the values of our system and our way of life here. That should be a primary precondition for any Chinese student, or for that matter, any Chinese Communist Party official or resident here. We have thousands of Chinese Communist Party members who come here to the United States and buy real estate because they want to get their money out of China. It's very difficult to do. The Treasury Department recently, and I wrote about this, they recently did a study and they found that Chinese money laundering has involved $32 billion in the United States just over the past 10 years. And a lot of that money is laundered through real estate. They have a process where they can buy real estate here, and that somehow helps them to get their money out of China. Under Chinese law, you can only take, I think, like $50,000 in cash out of the country. So they have to find a ways around the regulations.
And meanwhile, for people who have a little bit of time to Google, you should Google whether or not, as a U.S. citizen, you can buy property or land in China. And then ask yourself, why is there such a difference in policy? Today's episode is brought to you by Mizzen and Main. I tell you what, this was a wild one when this organization reached out to sponsor the show, because I have actually been wearing their product for the better part of a decade. I spend a good portion of every year traveling the world doing public speaking. And the only clothes that I wear when I do so are Mizzen and Main. They look amazing, incredibly professional, but they are by far the most comfortable professional/athletic technology wear that I have ever worn. Mizzen and Main makes classic menswear with performance fabrics, so it's effortless to look sharp and feel great. The shirts and pants, they look very refined, yet they are stretchy, lightweight, moisture wicking, wrinkle resistant, and completely machine washable, so no ironing or dry cleaning is required. These things are super easy to travel with as well. Mizzen and Main is a veteran-led organization committed to supporting those who have served. They offer a year-round military discount and proudly give back to veteran organizations. For a limited time, Mizzen and Main is giving our listeners 25% off their first order for Black Friday and Cyber Monday at mizzenandmain.com. Promo code Ironclad20. That's Mizzen, M-I-Z-Z-E-N, and Main, M-A-I-N.com. Promo code Ironclad20 for an exclusive 25% off. And if you'd rather shop in person, you can find Mizzen and Main at stores in select states. Are you looking for the perfect gift for the tactical or preparedness enthusiast in your life? TechPack delivers professional grade gear every month, including EDC essentials, tactical tools, and training aids, perfect for anyone who takes their gear seriously. This December, TechPack gets even better. The December Plus box is going to be packed with exclusive training tools, EDC equipment, and high-value items designed to level up any gear setup. They are also offering special holiday boxes. There's going to be a Christmas and Black Friday edition, and they are going to be stacked with premium high-quality gear, making them the perfect gift for yourself or someone on your list. And right now, if you use the code Ironclad, all one word, all caps, you're going to get a free tactical gift worth $70, bringing your total value to over $400 for signing up. So visit TacPack.com, use code Ironclad, and get the kind of gear that doesn't just sit on the shelf. I have found oftentimes the easiest way to understand who people are, or in this case, the Chinese Communist Party's aims and desires, is to just listen to them. And if you do listen to them and you realize that we are not an ally to them, even though they may promote that out there as propaganda, if you look at the actions, we're certainly an adversary. Why is the U.S., and again, you look at, no U.S. person is going to go over there and buy property or real estate, but yet we will allow them to do so. 600,000 students coming to the United States. And I think there's also great risk when it comes to science and technology, right? And those levels of advancements and going back with the IP as well. Buying property and real estate around military installations. It is such an unequal playing field, only because we are allowing it to be unequal. And I have yet to hear a justification from somebody at a decision-making level as to why they allow that. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, this has been something I've been writing about and trying to explain to people for a couple of decades now. And again, I think that the Chinese government has played this the American system like a violin in terms of exploiting our vulnerabilities and stealing our technologies. Almost on a monthly basis now, there'll be some Justice Department or FBI case involving a Chinese national who was caught trying to steal our technology, or someone who had worked for a major tech company and took their most valuable intellectual property and brought it back to China, where it's being used to develop competing products for our high-tech systems and equipment. So this is an ongoing problem. One of the really valuable things that has been done is in the House of Representatives and Congress is the creation of something called the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. And this has been a really valuable tool, as is a dedicated unit, bipartisan, Democrats and Republicans, who both focus on the Chinese threat. And they've done a lot of great work. My view is that what they need to do is to get more of restrictions on the Chinese Communist Party into federal law. It's nice to produce reports and have hearings and everything, but the best things that have happened have all been in law. A couple examples. 1971 Taiwan Relations Act. After the government derecognized Taiwan as the government of China and recognized Beijing, Congress stepped in and passed this law, which said, we're not going to abandon Taiwan, our democratic ally, in favor of the communists on the mainland. That's a powerful, powerful tool in U.S. policy. Whenever U.S. policy towards China is mentioned, there's a bunch of communiques and things, but it's the Taiwan Relations Act, which has the force of law, that we shall provide defensive weapons and that we shall have even unofficial relations. Another example is the annual Pentagon report on Chinese military power. This was done back in the Cold War for the Soviet Union. They did Soviet military power. This is in law, and it requires the Pentagon, and it's varied through administrations. The more pro-China administrations have put out very thin annual reports, whereas in the last 5 or 6 years, it's been an extensive expose of growing and threatening Chinese military power. So the congressional committee needs to do more. And again, China has focused its United Front Work Department efforts on influencing influencing Congress to make sure that tough policies. They also use their American businesses that were doing business in China or are, and they bring these business leaders in and they said, if you want to continue your company in China doing business here, we want you to lobby against this legislation that recognizes Taiwan as a closer U.S. ally. And so that's the kind of thing that we really need to have a top to bottom review of Chinese influence operations. This was done in the Pacific by an academic named Anne Marie Brady. And this was probably 5 or 7 years ago. She produced an amazing report on Chinese influence operations in Australia. And it had a major impact on the entire country. They, as a result of these identifying these influence operations by Beijing, the Australian government uncovered a large number of Chinese agents, including a PLA officer who was inside the Australian Parliament. And so we need to have a similar kind of full-blown look at Chinese influence operations and counter operations, basically cut it off.
If we could get you into a hypothetical world here, obviously, if we could get you into a room with policymakers and for 30 minutes, you got to wield the pen of legislative justice, and you could impart some laws that you think would immediately counteract some of China's influence. And again, this doesn't have to be a super expansive list, but where would you start? And they had to listen to you. So they're not going to argue against you. You get the pen of justice. I hope there's a pen of justice somewhere. It's got to be a quill or something amazing.
Well,
but where would you start?
Well, in our system, it's got to be both the executive and legislative have to be the best things. They have to work together. Congress passed a law, the president has to sign it. Supreme Court.
So in this made up world, the government is functioning in that manner. Where would you start with? So, I mean, actually describing it in that way, obviously this is a fairy tale, but we have forward thinking, we're hopeful, but where would you start?
Yeah. Well, the number one policy we should have, in my view, if I were king, if I were the president, or if I were the Speaker of the House, would be that we need to target the Chinese Communist Party as the source of all of their problems we have with communist China today. Regime change has been given a bad name by the efforts to oust regimes in Libya, in Iraq, and other places. They went badly. I mean, and that has created a backlash against this whole concept of regime change. But there will be no peace in this world as long as the Chinese Communist Party is driving to defeat the United States as one step towards global domination and the imposition of what they call Marxism-Leninism with Chinese characteristics. How do we do that? I think it's relatively easy. The Chinese communists, first of all, we need to really exquisitely dissect the top leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. Right now, it's headed by Xi Jinping at the top. They then have a standing committee of the Politburo, and this is a 7 to 9 member collective dictatorship, which is really the power behind the entire Chinese system. Then there's a central committee down below that, which is made up of about 200 people. And so basically, we need to map this leadership structure, and then through various means, intelligence means, I would be able to basically unseat the Chinese Communist Party and find people within the Chinese population who are pro-American, pro-democracy, pro-liberty and freedom, and really develop that. And so to create a situation, the U.S. can't change their system, but the Chinese people can change their system, like Reagan did with the Soviet Union. So that's where we go. That's really, I think, the key to really mitigating the China threat.
So I know nobody has a crystal ball, and we're obviously not Nostradamus here. And actually, even on the front of Nostradamus, people focus on what he got close to being right, and they forget the thousands of things that he got wrong. So that's not even a great example to begin with. But if you had a crystal ball and you were looking into this, let's say that the U.S. doesn't take any of those steps, and we do allow 600,000 students to come into the U.S. to our institutes of higher learning. How far down the road do you think it goes before this is a problem that can no longer be corrected?
I would say dealing with this issue, the Chinese have declared they have a certain number of certain dates
Mhm.
in their so-called modernization and quote national rejuvenation. I think the first one is 2027, which is when they want to resolve what they call the Taiwan issue. In other words, they want to take over Taiwan.
Mhm.
So that's the most immediate flashpoint. Military commanders in the Indo-Pacific Command, several have said, look, it's not a question of whether they're going to try and take Taiwan. It's only a question of when. And the other question is, well, how are they going to do that? They want to do it basically without firing a shot, through subterfuge, subversion, basically information power, get capitulation by the free and open democratic regime in Taiwan. So that's one significant point, 2027. 2035 is another marked period where Xi Jinping has told the Chinese military that he wants them to be what he calls a world-class military. And I think this is what is driving the massive nuclear buildup. They've gone from like 250 warheads to 600 today, and they're going to 1,000 or 1,500 down the road. Need to drink water. Um, and then 2049 will be another major milestone. That is going to be the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. I think between 35 and 49 is the period where we're in real trouble if we can't establish a good policy that would seek to mitigate the China threat.
It's fair. I know we're running close to the end of our time here. Last question for you today, and honestly, this might be the most meaningful question for the average listener or viewer, but for everyday Americans who they don't have their finger on the pulse of foreign policy, specifically on China like you do. Why should your everyday American, why should they care about China's strategy? How does it affect their daily lives? Because I think that's what a lot of people would say, like, yeah, I guess I kind of understand what you're saying, but I don't see it in my daily life, so why does it matter?
Mhm. Well, I think that I would tell them that this is a long-term threat. This is not something that's going to go away on its own. It's possible it could. Like I said, there could be forces we don't know within China that could basically say, "Look, we don't want communism anymore." But the threat is ideological. That is, it's on an idea level, and our institutions of higher learning, all of our institutions are not teaching students about this threat. They're not teaching about the history. Young people today do not have a full understanding of what happened in the Cold War. I was raised in the Cold War where we had to worry about nuclear attack.
Yeah.
I think we need to start doing more of that. I think we need to make people more aware of it, and the information is out there. Again, there's a concerted effort on the part of China for people not to get the right information. But this is a threat that is generational. For my children and my grandchildren, I want them to live in a free and open and democratic system, and I do not want the Chinese Communist Party to succeed.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Bill, thank you for your insight and your time today. And again, I know we've mentioned it a few times, but the most recent book that you wrote, the title and where people can find it.
It's called Deceiving the Sky: Inside Communist China's Drive for Global Supremacy. And you can find it at my website, gertzfile.com, or at any bookstore or amazon.com.
Awesome. Bill, thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like to learn more about Bill's work, please check out his book, Deceiving the Sky: Inside Communist China's Drive for Global Supremacy, and his website, gertzfile.com. Thank you again for listening to Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Firecracker Farm. See you all next week with an all-new episode and an all-new guest.